This is Ben Television News Roundup, a compilation of major stories in the weekend. I'm Tunde Alabi. Thank you for being part of the program today. Prime Minister David Cameron says his government is working on passing a legislation that will make it impossible for illegal migrants to get driver's license, open a bank account, and also rent a house. The Prime Minister made this known while responding to a BBC interview on the Calais crisis, where migrants struggle to enter into Britain.
We've already spent money erecting the border fence around the port at Calais. We're putting in place the border fence at Coquelles outside the tunnel. The French are sending an extra 120 police. Everything that can be done will be done to make sure our borders are secure and make sure that British holidaymakers are able to go on their holidays. What I would say is that we have to keep our borders secure. That means taking action at the border. It means taking advantage of the fact that our border controls are actually on the French side, which is a great advantage for our nation. But also, yes, what it also means is we have to deal with the problem at source, and that is stopping so many people from travelling across the Mediterranean in search of a better life. Now that means doing everything from trying to stabilise the countries from which they come. It also means breaking the link between travelling and getting the right to stay in Europe. And frankly, yes, it also means in our own country, as I've done as Prime Minister, making sure it's less easy for illegal migrants to stay in Britain. That's why we're passing legislation. We've done this very recently to make sure you can't get a driving licence, you can't rent a house, you can't take out a bank account, and that we will remove more illegal migrants from our country so people know it's not a safe haven once you get there.
There's no other adjective for it. There's 3,000 people on this camp. They don't have enough plastic, they don't have enough tents, they don't have enough blankets, they don't have enough food. It's escalated mostly. It started about 6 weeks ago. It became more and more hectic because we have about between 30 and 50 new arrivals every day.
It's very difficult to come from Eritrea to France, risking your life too much on the way from Eritrea to Sudan, from Sudan to Eritrea, from Sudan to Libya. It's just the difficult journeys, the Sahara. It takes almost 1 month, it can take you up to 2 months, the journey. There is too much dangerous things happens. It's just very difficult.
At the beginning, the very 1st of April, there were 1,000 people in Calais. Today there's 3,000. So we expect at least another 2,000 over the summer.
We are contributing to the operation in the Mediterranean to pick people up. We are helping the Italians in Italy with their asylum system. But the fact is, people want to come to Britain because we've created so many jobs and because we're such a great country to live in. Now the answer to that is to strengthen our border controls, remove more illegal migrants, go after the illegal gangs that are bringing these people here and bringing them to Britain and often making them live in poor conditions. All of those things we are doing. Is it testing? Yes, of course it is. But is the government totally focused on it, working with the French? Yes, we are.
U.S. President Barack Obama has become the first U.S. president to address the joint session of the African Union, AU. Speaking at the African Summit in Ethiopia, President Barack Obama said that Africa will only be able to attain its full economic potentials when African leaders shun corruption and see tight syndrome.
Members of the African Union, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for welcoming me here today. It is a great honor to be the first president of the United States to address the African Union. I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak to the representatives of more than 1 billion people of the great African continent. We're joined today by citizens, by leaders of civil society, by faith communities, and I'm especially pleased to see so many young people who embody the energy and optimism of today's Africa. Hello. Thank you for being here. I stand before you as a proud American. I also stand before you as the son of an African. Africa and its people helped to shape America and allowed it to become the great nation that it is, and Africa and its people have helped shape who I am and how I see the world. In the villages in Kenya where my father was born, I learned of my ancestors and the life of my grandfather, the dreams of my father, the bonds of family that connect us all as Africans and Americans. As parents, Michelle and I want to make sure that our two daughters know their heritage, European and African, in all of its strengths and all of its struggle. So we've taken our daughters and stood with them on the shores of West Africa, in those doors of no return, mindful that their ancestors were both slaves and slave owners. We've stood with them in that small cell on Robben Island, where Madiba showed the world that no matter the nature of his physical confinement, he alone was the master of his fate. For us, for our children, Africa and its people teach us a powerful lesson: that we must uphold the inherent dignity of every human being. Dignity. That basic idea that by virtue of our common humanity, no matter where we come from or what we look like, we are all born equal, touched by the grace of God. Every person has worth. Every person matters. Every person deserves to be treated with decency and respect. Throughout much of history, mankind did not see this. Dignity was seen as a virtue reserved to those of rank and privilege, kings and elders. It took a revolution of the spirit over many centuries to open our eyes to the dignity of every person. And around the world, generations have struggled to put this idea into practice in laws and in institutions. So too here in Africa. This is the cradle of humanity. And ancient African kingdoms were home to great libraries and universities. But the evil of slavery took root, not only abroad, but here on the continent. Colonialism skewed Africa's economy and robbed people of their capacity to shape their own destiny. Eventually, liberation movements grew. And 50 years ago, in a great burst of self-determination, Africans rejoiced as foreign flags came down and your national flags went up. As South Africa's Albert Lutuli said at the time, the basis for peace and brotherhood in Africa is being restored by the resurrection of national sovereignty and independence, of equality and the dignity of man. A half-century into this independence era, it is long past time to put aside old stereotypes of an Africa forever mired in poverty and conflict. The world must recognize Africa's extraordinary progress. Today, Africa is one of the fastest-growing regions in the world. Africa's middle class is projected to grow to more than 1 billion consumers, with hundreds of mobile phones, hundreds of millions of mobile phones, surging access to the internet. Africans are beginning to leapfrog old technologies into new prosperity. Africa is on the move. A new Africa is emerging. Propelled by this progress and in partnership with the world, Africa has achieved historic gains in health. The rate of new HIV/AIDS infections has plummeted. African mothers are more likely to survive childbirth and have healthy babies. Deaths from malaria have been slashed, saving the lives of millions of African children. Millions have been lifted from extreme poverty. Africa has led the world in sending more children to school. In other words, more and more African men, women, and children are living with dignity and with hope. And Africa's progress can also be seen in the institutions that bring us together today. When I first came to sub-Saharan Africa as a president, I said that Africa doesn't need strong men, it needs strong institutions. And one of those institutions can be the African Union. Here you can come together with a shared commitment to human dignity and development. Here your 54 nations pursue a common vision of an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa. As Africa changes, I've called on the world to change its approach to Africa. So many Africans have told me, we don't want just aid, we want trade that fuels progress. We don't want patrons, we want partners who help us build our own capacity to grow. We don't want the indignity of dependence, we want to make our own choices and determine our own future. And as president, I've worked to transform America's relationship with Africa so that we're truly listening to our African friends and working together as equal partners. And I'm proud of the progress that we've made. We've boosted American exports to this region, part of trade that supports jobs for Africans and Americans. To sustain our momentum, and with the bipartisan support of some of the outstanding members of Congress who are here today, 20 of them who are here today, I recently signed the 10-year renewal of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, and I want to thank them all. Why don't they stand very briefly so you can see them, because they've done outstanding work. We've launched major initiatives to promote food security and public health and access to electricity, and to prepare the next generation of African leaders and entrepreneurs, investments that will help fuel Africa's rise for decades to come. Last year, as the chairwoman noted, I welcomed nearly 50 African presidents and prime ministers to Washington so we could begin a new chapter of cooperation. And by coming to the African Union today, I'm looking to build on that commitment. I believe Africa's rise is not just important for Africa, it's important to the entire world. We will not be able to meet the challenges of our time, from ensuring a strong global economy, to facing down violent extremism, to combating climate change, to ending hunger and extreme poverty, without the voices and contributions of 1 billion Africans.
Also, in the meantime, U.S. President Barack Obama has said his government has raised well over $1 billion to support startup businesses in Africa. Speaking in Nairobi, Kenya, at the Young African Entrepreneur Summit organized as part of his programs during his recent visit to Kenya, President Obama described Africa as a future social economic hub of the world.
We are joined today by inspiring entrepreneurs from more than 120 countries, and many from across Africa. And all of you embody a spirit that we need to take on some of the biggest challenges that we face in the world. The spirit of entrepreneurship, the idea that there are no limits to the human imagination, that ingenuity can overcome what is and create what needs to be. And everywhere I go across the United States and around the world, I hear from people, but especially young people, who are ready to start something of their own, to lift up people's lives and shape their own destinies. And that's entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship creates new jobs and new businesses, new ways to deliver basic services, new ways of seeing the world. It's the spark of prosperity. It helps citizens stand up for their rights and push back against corruption. Entrepreneurship offers a positive alternative to the ideologies of violence and division that can all too often fill the void when young people don't see a future for themselves. Entrepreneurship means ownership and self-determination, as opposed to simply being dependent on somebody else for your livelihood and your future. Entrepreneurship brings down barriers between communities and cultures and builds bridges that help us take on common challenges together. Because one thing that entrepreneurs understand is that you don't have to look a certain way or be of a certain faith or have a certain last name in order to have a good idea. Now, the challenge is, as so many of you know, it's very often hard to take those first steps. It's hard to access capital. It's hard sometimes to get the training and the skills to run a business as professionally as it needs to be in this competitive world. It's hard to tap into the networks and mentors that can mean the difference between a venture taking off and one that falls flat. And it's even harder for women and young people in communities that have often been marginalized and denied access to opportunities. You run into old attitudes that say some people, because of where you come from or what you look like, don't have what it takes to lead or create a business. And sometimes it's subtle. You go in to pitch an idea, and maybe the response you get might not be as enthusiastic as if someone else pitched the exact same idea. Sometimes women or folks from communities that historically have not been viewed as entrepreneurial may not have the means of opening those doors just to get in front of the right person. Of course, the best answer to that kind of thinking is the example that all of you are setting, your success. And that's why I've made encouraging this spirit of entrepreneurship a key part of America's engagement in the world. I launched the first of these summits in Washington 5 years ago. And since then, we've helped empower hundreds of thousands of entrepreneurs, giving them a boost to launch thousands of new businesses and initiatives. Here in Africa, our Young African Leaders Initiative is empowering tens of thousands of dynamic leaders, not only in business, but also in government and civil society. Because one of the things that we have come to understand, and this is particularly relevant to Africa, is that in order to create successful entrepreneurs, the government also has a role in creating the transparency and the rule of law and the ease of doing business and the anti-corruption agenda that creates a platform for people to succeed. So this is our first global entrepreneurship summit in sub-Saharan Africa. We wanted to come here. I wanted to be here because Africa is on the move. Africa is one of the fastest growing regions of the world. People are being lifted out of poverty, incomes are up, the middle class is growing, and young people like you are harnessing technology to change the way Africa is doing business, as President Kenyatta alluded to. And that creates incredible opportunities for Africans and for the world. It means more growth and trade that creates jobs in all our countries. It's good for all of us. This continent needs to be a future hub of global growth, not just African growth. And the country that's hosting us today is setting an important example. Kenya is leading the way. Today, Kenya is the largest economy in East Africa. High-speed broadband and mobile connectivity are on the rise, unleashing the entrepreneurial spirit of even more Kenyans. Every day around the world, millions of people send and save money with M-Pesa. And it's a great idea that started here in Kenya. From Zimbabwe to Bangladesh, citizens work to keep elections safe using crowdsourcing platform Ushahidi. And that's a great idea that started right here in Kenya. Here in Nairobi, startup incubators are nurturing new businesses every day, maybe some of yours, each with the potential to be the great next Kenyan innovation. And the good news is that I'm not the only one who sees the promise of Africa. I'm joined on this trip by some leaders, not just across my administration, but I'm also joined by 20 members of the United States Congress from both parties, because supporting a strong partnership with Africa is something that unites Americans. We've got some incredible entrepreneurs and business leaders who are well established from the United States who are with us. They see the promise as well, and they're putting their money where their mouth is. So today we're taking the next steps to partner with you. First, we're offering entrepreneurs more startup capital. At last year's Entrepreneurship Summit, we set a goal of generating $1 billion in new investment for emerging entrepreneurs around the world, with half the money going to support women and young people. A few months ago, I challenged governments, companies, organizations, and individuals to help us reach this target. Today, I am proud to announce that not only did we make our goal, we surpassed it. We secured more than $1 billion in new commitments from banks, foundations, philanthropists, all to support entrepreneurs like you.
And with that story on the recent visit of Barack Obama to Kenya, we conclude the news roundup for this week. Thank you for being part of the story. I'm Tunde Alabi. I'll see you again. Do have a very beautiful week ahead. Bye. As part of our continued efforts to reach the African and other ethnic communities in the United Kingdom with greater impacts and create the platform to hear your silent and unheard views in this hugely growing community in the United Kingdom, our channel, Ben TV, presents to you another live current affairs television program. Our focus on the program is to review and discuss issues around the diaspora community in the UK. The program offers you that unrestricted voice on issues affecting you in the UK. Join us live every Monday at 10 a.m. to 12 noon. Another business segment of Dialogue in Diaspora, 2 to 3 p.m. every Monday. But guess what? You can be part of the program. Just send us an email at bentelevisionuk@gmail.com. Dialogue in Diaspora, your voice, your opinion on our TV.